A series of topics that I think holds far more nuance than many others would be these versus the Five Kage Summit type videos, running these small teams to the gauntlet in Sasuke's place. And I was thinking of several different duos to put here, and one that really gripped my attention was Shisui and Itachi, a duo that I not only strive to discuss a little bit more about, but also one I think is underrated. However, to initially establish this match, yes, they will be placed directly in Sasuke's position after Zetsu puts their location out, forcing them to fight the Raikage first, and then the rest to follow in the same order as it initially did. With that though, it should be demonstrably clear that if Itachi was in his Akatsuki days, this wouldn't really be much of a fight. Through the duration of the summit, upon numerous separate occasions, Sasuke is compared to Itachi constantly, considering he just unlocked the Susanoo and was hence evolving it to the level Itachi achieved, alongside honing his Genjutsu, which is still stated to be a far cry from Itachi's towards the end of the summit, which should be very consistent with how Sasuke was stated to have finally surpassed Itachi in the EMS, making Itachi objectively above Five Kage Summit Sasuke by quite a long shot, making this victory very easy. So I've decided to take Itachi from the massacre after the EMS, which would mean we can give him like a rather adept Tsukiyomi, as he does use that during the massacre, and likely an inexperienced Amaterasu, as he didn't use that until one time after killing Suguru, Danzo's right hand man, directly following his departure of Konoha. This being the only time he uses it, so when interpreting how many times he can use it, it can get a little complicated. So whenever he's sick, we know that he either uses it 3, 4, or 5 times against Sasuke, and this is an Itachi who literally has a heart attack and is deathly sick. So you could say, well, maybe he can use it more in this fight, because of his more experience he has, maybe more chakra and whatnot, or he could use it less since during the massacre he was getting more amps and obviously wasn't sick. So you can kind of interpret that how you will, and the reason why I say 3, 4, or 5 is kind of depending on how you interpret this panel right here, among a few others, as this could be an after shadow, so maybe Itachi shoots it and these are just kind of conveying how the Amaterasu is falling, rather than it just like showing one Amaterasu where it would be stuck in the air. So that might give the readers the impression that like it's not falling. So maybe Kishimoto drew this as an after impression, as like how he does against A when he dodges the Amaterasu, where A, there's like 2 A's, but we obviously know that's because A moved so fast that it left a kind of shadow of himself. So you can interpret this as either 3 Amaterasu or 1. It doesn't really matter, but like he will get, like Itachi and Shisui will both get the Zetsu like regen during the Mei fight. So basically you could say that like he could use it, maybe 2 times and then use it 1 or 2 more after the regen, or if you think he can do it like 5 times, then he might be able to do it like 4 times in the Raikage fight and like 3 times after. As for Shisui, we'll be upholding his leadership role out of the 2, and we will grant him a fairly charitable and widespread interpretation of his ability, so we don't conclude with some subpar, well, he's a featless fodder who got his ass whooped by Danzo, which is neither accurate nor honest to do so. With that being said though, to begin with a brief section about where Itachi and Shisui scale, both whilst kids, and Itachi and Shisui are established to spar together consistently, with the record being 9-6 prior to the break, but even following the break, it's about the exact same proportionally in Shisui's favor, and this would be a no Sharingan sparring match, which is incredibly important for Itachi, since we'll be taking him from the massacre when he gets amped, and is much more stronger via getting the MS, where getting the MS, he's certainly standing above all the Konoha Zanbus such as Kakashi, placing him above Mukai Koinadu, who actually beat up Shisui and Itachi several years back, showing just how much growth he's actually been able to accomplish here. Enough growth for Itachi upon seeing Obito in the Uchiha basement, noting how he would use his Kamui to weave around certain cameras. He confronted him with just a little bit of brief dialogue before they exited the room to relocate to a path lined by cedar trees under a full moon, with the road to Tsunegakure being in sight. This being important as it's literally just a novel grounding itself to the original manga, where the exact same scene is laid out in both Itachi and Obito's recollection of this conversation from the manga, just with a little bit more added to the conversation that was initially left out, but is still implied to be there. After it's established that Itachi wouldn't allow Obito to take revenge, he follows with "I have conditions," cutting straight through Obito's attitude. "I'll help you get revenge on the Uchiha clan, and in exchange, you don't lay a hand on the village or Sasuke Uchiha." Obito by this point was unable to hide his shock at Itachi's forcefulness, this being defined as physical energy or intensity, which is very critical as we'll discuss in a minute. Itachi's face devoid of all expressions, he offered the answer to Obito's questioning, stating, "If you refuse this request, you and I are enemies," and Obito just had to ask, "Could you kill me?" And Itachi rebuted with, "It's not a matter of if I can or not, I will kill you." And then the two shinobi acknowledged each other as opponents with no more bloodlust remaining in their auras, which might imply there was prior. Now, the reason this is so crucial for Itachi's growth hinges much more upon their initial encounter 4 years prior, where Obito slaughtered Itachi's squad set to protect the daimyo, where Itachi's fear of Obito's pressure and aura was so overwhelming that he was paralyzed and couldn't even process the phenomenon of Obito's body. So when you get statements that Itachi's energy or Itachi's intensity cut straight through Obito's intensity and whatnot, where they acknowledge each other as opponents, where Itachi didn't even feel any doubt in his promise to kill Obito, this is probably pretty telling. This being Itachi's main line of scaling through the massacre, and it's probably pretty clear of just how Itachi is and just how strong he is, as Shisui, if not stronger, due to, again, this growth and his MS. And now, your belief on if Itachi is stronger than Obito here isn't really that important, as the main note of this scene would just be that Itachi is of a caliber capable of combating Obito in some sense, where he would be confident in winning in some ambiguous way, which would be likely just to imply that this massacre Itachi is probably much closer to his Akatsuki counterpart than his pre-massacre counterpart, which is just extremely telling, as even in those days, a fireball jutsu he literally had stated to be, an indispensable skill of every Uchiha, was already rivaling the peak of the clan alongside Shisui and Fugaku. The anime profile guides 3 literally elaborates a little bit more upon this, stating that Itachi's abilities were so outstanding even compared to the village police force, a force stated in the same book to be the strongest clan in the entire Leaf Village, and that the clan was literally the reason why the Leaf Village had peace, which is also just the strongest village, as it notes. This aligns fairly comfortably with Itachi's childhood oath to be the peak of the shinobi world, or to be the strongest in the shinobi world, where no one else could really deny him. Now, he would just be, he just slaughtered his entire clan and endured countless tragedy of that night, which according to Maguire from the Sakura novel, each loss is basically a fold increase to power, showing just how insane Itachi probably is by this point. And of course, he does grow in ability as well, also as implied by the anime profile guide. So Itachi by this point, while he might not be getting 200 times stronger, as that's probably just not true, it should still speak just how strong Itachi is. And yes, despite not being the Hokage, obviously, he probably just is of that tier, which would be pretty important, as the chapter 457 synopsis statement does know how this summit is literally a gathering of the most powerful ninjas, so Itachi is probably just entering the summit being probably closer to the stronger combatants than the weaker. So, with this praise for Itachi, could Shisui still bridge this gap to capitalize on their roles as a duo? And to be honest, probably. Now, I'm sure you're wondering how in the world could he possibly be close to this Itachi despite dying to Danzo, and to answer that, we need to first note which interpretation we are taking, and that would probably be the novel, as it's considered canon to the manga, and the manga doesn't make an interpretation to this scene and leaves it ambiguous, which the novel then touches on and gives us a much more accurate representation of how Shisui and someone of his power could die in such a pathetic way, where he wasn't just blitzed by Danzo and got his eyes ripped out, but was instead infected by a paralytic and poison by Suguru Aburame, where he could barely move at all, with it likely also just disrupting his chakra network as well. However, even with his poison being in play, he was capable of body flickering away so fast that Danzo couldn't even see, and it typically actually requires Shisui to use a right hand tiger sign to body flicker, meaning that he might just be a perception blitz level above this no Sharingan Danzo with his body flicker, which could be consistent, as Yashiro in the original manga seems to think that Shisui was the greatest ever at body flicker and was one of the most talented Uchiha clansmen ever. This should speak leaps and bounds about Shisui's reputation, considering he participated in the Third War along with Minato, who earned the nickname the Yellow Flash due to his flying thunder god as implied by the second data book. So maybe Yashiro or the clan's perspective actually holds Shisui as faster or better at body flicker than even Third War Minato. However, you might want to add some skepticism to this, as Yashiro is blatantly biased when it comes to the pride of the Uchiha clan, wanting Fugaku and even Orochimaru as Hokage rather than Minato. So if Shisui is a perception blitz level above Danzo, or close to it, with either just his reaction speed or body flicker, then where does this actually place Shisui when it comes down to understanding the summit? And this actually comes down to understanding a few basic fundamentals about the Sharingan and how it actually affects the rest of his body and Danzo's left eye's perception, which is what's mainly important here. So essentially, we know that chakra is drained very fast when an ocular jutsu ability like the Sharingan is active, and for those who lack an Uchiha body, this is even more prevalent. Take Kakashi for example. He constantly has drained his chakra reserves in the rest of his body since his right eye is drawing so much of that chakra, and since it's also laid out that a loss in chakra also causes slowness and fatigue. So imagine Danzo, but not just one, but potentially over a dozen Sharingan pulling from his reserves, so his left eye's perception would actually be greater than his left eye's perception that was able to track peak Kage Summit Sasuke. Not just this, but even in terms of raw movement speed, Danzo is relative to Sasuke, with the chapter synopsis statement claiming they pierced each other at the same time. Now, one thing someone could note would be his usage of Hashirama cells in his right arm, which yes, would aid in his recovery ability from the draining. However, to not just recover that many Sharingan, but also to just grant a stat increase of a perception blitz level is probably a bit disingenuous to assert. So Shisui very well could just be above this later Five Kage Summit Sasuke, who would be much stronger than the one who initially fought A, and even if you don't think he's massively above this like later Sasuke, then you can just say he's close to it, as this is a pretty good place to place Shisui, and kind of aligns much more consistently with his lore, rather than saying, well, he was so strong and then he kind of got blitzed by Danzo. So this is kind of consistent, and just we can run with that for the video, as this is kind of like a grounding of all medians for him, as we'll also touch on some game stuff later. And I suppose this leads us into our first round, for us to first establish how Shisui is just objectively above this lower Sasuke, who actually gets chakra amps throughout the summit, and gets 2 of them following the initial Raikage battle. The first of which would be him upgrading his Susanoo to a skeletal form, where Karian states his chakra is even colder, which probably just isn't much of an amp compared to how he gets the later version 3 weapon equipped Susanoo, where he stated to be not even the same Sasuke as before, where Obito also just corroborates this idea, stating that this is a stat amp, as he states that his hatred is maturing and his body is reacting to the hatred, which follows very well with like how Tobirama states the deeper the darkness gets, the greater the ocular powers become, and even Fukasaku supports this idea by discussing if your chakra gains power, your ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu will also all get a serious boost, when he's talking about senjutsu for Naruto. So Shisui here is probably just stronger than any of these early MS Sasuke versions, which would also be pretty consistent with Shisui's scaling in relation to Itachi. So while I think Itachi and Shisui are probably much closer to equals if you take these interpretations, and granted I would state these are probably 2 of the best routes to take, as there isn't really much for both of these, and these 2 are very consistent, they would probably be able to still combo similarly, or how they would prior. So now we get stuck with Shisui versus the Raikage, who actually does enter this fight in the version 1 cloak, and Itachi versus C and Darui. Now, it should be pretty obvious, especially considering how C isn't even really a combative type, as Darui tells him to go search for Sasuke's companions because he isn't even needed there, whereas Darui, the more combative aide, being there is much more consistent, with Darui's lore being the only shinobi that has the mark of the third, and mark relevant to where Kinkaku and Genkaku thought they were going to get a good fight, literally just based on that tattoo, and how he could utilize the Black Lightning. But I mean, bro just doesn't even utilize the Black Lightning in character, and only really uses it once on White Zetsus. So it may not even come up unless he's faced with like death, which is probably just destined to happen, seeing as Darui is probably the strongest Cloud Jonin, other than B if you consider him a Jonin, and Itachi basically just stands him on the peak of the Anbu Black Ops, which would just be higher than Jonin, which is pretty accurate considering the Leaf and the Cloud are listed to have the same military might. And I mean, Itachi also just had the praise of practically being above the entire Uchiha clan, which is the strongest group in Konoha, placing Itachi at the peak of Konoha, or very, very close to it, when nothing is implied similarly to Darui. which I will say, if Itachi doesn't enter the MS, which he probably won't, seeing as there isn't a necessity to, Darui could potentially catch him with his water wall and emotion wave combo if he were to get really lucky, but that's about it. Again, Itachi does have his fireball, which again is pretty impressive. Like the 10-year anniversary guide states how his fireball can't even be compared to ordinary fire style, which is pretty telling for the likelihood of him being able to catch Darui. Maybe he can even blind him with the Phoenix Flower Jutsu, and I mean, bro, if you still don't think Itachi just stabs him in the throat with his sword, then this is all just supplementary material, as he could even just enter the MS for a quick Tsukiyomi, which would obviously drop Darui. This is only in extreme conditions though, considering Itachi's Kenjutsu is just pressure, as he is shown being able to wield Sasuke's blade against Kabuto, where Itachi could strike so consistently to set the Izanami loop, which is just pretty good feats, coupled with his Sharingan's ability to read hand signs, to even utilize precognition in combat to further his skills with the blade. You could also use his Edo Tensei form, being able to parry off over 10 different strikes from the 8 sword style, as a testament to just how adept his tracking ability is with just his 3 Tomoe Sharingan, which more importantly his skills in recognizing sword patterns, as Darui does use a sword. Despite C also just jumping Itachi alongside Darui, it shouldn't really be much of a problem. I mean, Itachi at the age of 7 was able to resist Obito's mass genjutsu that knocked out several elite Anbu members and the Daimyo guards, but didn't knock out Itachi or his genjutsu specialist teammate Tenma. So I would have a pretty hard time believing that even if C used the Flash Pillar a second time, it would even catch Itachi. The Flash Pillar also is literally just a jutsu that most Cloud Shinobi in the war can perform. So, you know, Itachi with no Sharingan can resist Obito's genjutsu, so put 2 and 2 together is pretty clear. This concludes that neither Darui nor C really stand a chance, and Itachi should just be able to put them down and go help Shisui in his battle against A quite quickly. And let's be honest, A will need to be in his version 2 state, as even Darui is shown relative to V1A, and this V1A was able to move equally with a much weaker Sasuke and then the one that Shisui would be comparable to, with that weaker Sasuke utilizing the Sharingan to precog and counter A's elbow strike, which, I mean, Shisui and Itachi also could do, but even once A went into his version's 2 state, he was demonstrably faster than even MS Sasuke in his combat speed. With his reaction speed and perception speed, he was still able to perceive and defend himself with the Enton Kagetsuchi, meaning that since Shisui and Itachi are directly above this Sasuke, they could also probably just react and perceive, if not more than what Sasuke can do, meaning that Shisui's body flicker would probably just come into play to get around here and would be pretty deadly. And the same would be said for Itachi's genjutsu, such as the Tsukiyomi, which I mean would obviously mess up A if it hit. And I mean, for those who want to bring up its implications of being immune to genjutsu, this would just be wrong, as Madara catches him in a basic one in the war, where A questioned how he fell prey to the Sharingan genjutsu, meaning that A's statement during the summit basically would just mean that, like, it would basically just be him making a claim off past experiences and a level of overconfidence. A's overconfidence is also just really blatant when you know his eye contact throughout the entire summit, where he just looks at Sasuke's Sharingan the entire time, which isn't anything to shit on A, as this is actually a pretty common thing for similar fighters, such as how Minato blatantly stares at Obito, and B blatantly stares at Sasuke through the entire fight, yet doesn't get genjutsu'd until the MS, which Sasuke literally bypasses the V1 cloak to do, and we know that the V1 Bijou cloak and the lightning cloak are probably just relative based on their combos. Which, while Itachi's Tsukiyomi it does seem to be much more draining than Sasuke's base MS genjutsu. That's probably just true, as even nearly 70 chapters later of Sasuke fighting and mastering his MS and his genjutsu, it's still stated to be a far cry from Itachi's, with the difference being night and day. Also, Itachi using an MS ability here is probably just fine, considering A's caliber being one of the stronger combatants during the entire summit, and he probably is just a very imposing threat with this title of the Raikage. So, while Shisui might just be able to body flicker around him and, you know, maybe stab him or whatever, potentially if you think he can get through the cloak, probably not, Itachi probably would just resort to Tsukiyomi and drop him out of the fight. And even if he doesn't, you know, even Madara's genjutsu, his genjutsu when he did hit A kind of just dropped him down to his knees due to A losing control over his chakra network. So this would kind of just give Shisui or Itachi the advantage to capitalize on and win if it does drop him in the same manner. However, to keep it consistent, we'll just say that Gaara could save A like last minute, and Itachi and Shisui will just briefly battle him as Sasuke did. And while Itachi doesn't have his Susanoo yet at all, Shisui might if you consider the Naruto Storm Generations canon, where he actually briefly does use a Susanoo to fire out a stream of lasers to put some pressure on the Foundation forces before he actually lost control over it due to the poison. And while I wouldn't ever state this to be concretely canon, it's probably possible, at least considering how Kishimoto did design the Susanoo and actually drew the Susanoo drill as Shisui's weapon in the official Naruto 99 artwork instead of giving him his typical like sword that he would have. And even if you don't think this is canon, that's fine. It's just like another idea to help Shisui and Itachi against the combo attacks, where they could just body flicker away and try to cut down the pillars as Sasuke did, as their motivations will be of course the same to hunt Danzo, and he is likely in the other room. So if you think Shisui has the Susanoo, then it's probably like it's probably like perfectly possible, seeing as his weapon is literally a drill, so he probably could just knock down the summit. And if not, then they could just utilize many of their like high level techniques and maybe even like an Amaterasu if necessary, as this is pretty interesting, as Sasuke's Amaterasu and Itachi's Amaterasu have to be different due to how Sasuke's power growth is throughout the series, but for Itachi's it's literally stated to be impossible to dodge and the strongest physical attack. So it's pretty devastating for basically anyone in the summit, and if it's focused on the pillars, which is the intended set for Itachi's line of sight, then it probably would just burn down the pillars and cause this room to fall, as it did in the original manga. Then they enter into the initial summit meeting room, probably in quicker time than Sasuke, where they will probably get some chakra resin from Zetsu. However, one benefit Shisui and Itachi have would simply be how both characters are very combative and powerful, unlike Sasuke's companion Karin. So Shisui could just charge Danzo out the door and battle him, leaving Itachi to fight the gauntlet match of Mei and Chojuro, and then Ohnoki and Akatsuchi. And to begin with Itachi's match, it's actually simple, considering we should be made aware how Itachi is portrayed as a superior to someone like Mei, who also has just become pretty underrated despite her ability to press Sasuke just as well as the Raikage. However, it needs to be noted that that's likely credited to how Sasuke is now much more fatigued and he is having trouble standing. So yes, just barely dodging her attacks and deciding to outright tank Chojuro's hammer with the Susanoo would probably just be attributed to how the initial portion of the fight, Sasuke can dodge her lava style in just his 3 Tomoe Sharingan, which he then just activates his MS to attempt and warn Mei to not interfere, where he then just takes a very defensive approach, not trying to use much chakra at all. Then she tries to blast him again with the lava style, and likely due to his fatigue, as again he just already could dodge it, so here he just decides to just tank it, where Chojuro also follows up an attempt to break the Susanoo to where it just basically takes no damage from his hit and is totally unharmed. Then he notices her corrosive acid miss and actually attempts to hold up the V2 state, where he simply drains himself down of the rest of his reserves and just fumbles, and Karin states how his chakra is now weakening, and again his chakra does correlate to his potency overall and whatnot, and other things like speed. So of course you then have Zetsu, who comes in and recharges a solid portion of Sasuke's chakra, like enough for him to be able to use more abilities again. So it probably is a really good point, and he does get this chakra from the Kage and the aids and whatnot, so he would also just be giving it to Itachi here. Not Shisui though, but considering we've had Itachi doing a lot more taxing levels of fighting, whereas Shisui just been body flickering, this is probably more helpful for here. So yeah, this will of course happen to Itachi as well, although he's already been deemed stronger than Sasuke, so his struggle here wouldn't be near of that as Sasuke's, as again Sasuke only was put down to the position that he was in due to his accumulated fatigue actually setting in. And yes, fatigue will be setting in for Itachi, but he's already stronger and had Shisui to aid him, so he won't be nearly as fatigued, but actually might be experiencing similar growth amps as Sasuke, and Itachi would have just unlocked the MS by this point and doesn't really have the Sharingan, so he probably is in a very similar place to Sasuke for their Sharingan evolutions. So Itachi could probably beat up Mei and Chojuro for the same reasons he could beat up Darui in the version 1 Raikage, where I think that Itachi might need the Amaterasu or Tsukiyomi to overcome Mei's lava style and her corrosive acid mist. And one thing to note about Mei and her power, like this is one thing to kind of show she is underrated, is she's one of the only characters in the entire series to ever melt a Susanoo, that being Mei and Kaguya. So that's pretty telling. However, even with that lava style, like its level of heat, it's probably not near as hot as the Amaterasu, considering its lore being a different tier of ninjutsu compared to even high level summons in like ninjutsu of Konoha Jonin like Kakashi. And it's also just hailed to be the strongest physical attack by Zetsu to emphasize more of its lore and just how hot it can be. Another thing is that the second data book makes a note on it and states that it's actually as hot as the sun, where that kind of burns around 27 million degrees Fahrenheit, whereas magma's temperature, even at the core of the Earth, is typically a little above 9,000 degrees, showing the level of difference. And yes, for those who would doubt Amaterasu's heat, I could definitely see your doubts, as it didn't even burn these trees, which is something just akin to a target for the Amaterasu, as it also doesn't instantly burn the armor on the samurai, and there's still time for Kankuro and Temari to just remove their armor and whatnot. So it probably does just have the intended target, whereas it doesn't just burn everything it touches. So yeah, Amaterasu could certainly overpower Mei's lava style, or water style, or mist, and basically anything Chojuro has in his arsenal. Another good way to just solidify how this would be is how Itachi, upon just joining the Akatsuki, fought Gaara, the 4th Mizukage, and the 3-tailed Shinchuriki, where Gaara was even forced to enter his V2 state upon just Itachi's fireball alone, and was then able to pressure Itachi and kill Juzo with 2 Bijou bombs, where Itachi simply burned through the V2 hide and dropped him to the ground unconscious with Amaterasu. Basically, just considering his lore as a Jinchuriki and the Mizukage, it's pretty clear where this young Itachi would stand amongst the likes as the Mizukage and whatnot. And I mean, bro, it's Chojuro. So he probably could just beat them up and potentially even kill them, or just get close to until the strongest Kage, Ohnoki, intervenes. Which, while he doesn't do much in the original summit, he does get the absolute closest to killing Sasuke, and would have done such if Obito hadn't intervened and saved Sasuke with Kamui. This is just really good stuff for Ohnoki. Bro did one attack in the entire summit and was the closest to killing Sasuke out of everyone. However, how does this make Ohnoki the strongest Kage? And well, it's not really from this performance here, but rather his performance during the war arc, where he still has back pains and of course is getting even older, but is still capable of perfectly timing and heavily reacting to this version 2 Raikage, even a heavily amped one at that, to then slow him down and make him heavier to hit harder, meaning that Ohnoki can just react to speeds much faster than the V2 Raikage, hence to why I call him the strongest Kage and ranked him as the 2nd strongest character other than Obito during the entire summit. So to be honest, whatever Akatsuchi is doing here is rather just irrelevant, partially due to just how strong Ohnoki is. And if we're being real, Itachi might just die to Ohnoki, which may come to surprise, but the only real way you really think Itachi should be asserted higher here, or at least enough to escape and head to the Danzo fight, would be A, if you think he's far above Obito, or B, if you think he can ignite Amaterasu on Ohnoki's face as soon as the particle style gets formed and isn't actually shot out yet, or just use Genjutsu. The latter and both are just far more likely, as Itachi being above Obito by a decent margin just can't be proven, and the Amaterasu might even be able to be dodged, just how fast Ohnoki is by this point. But the Tsukiyomi might just be the perfect stall for Itachi to stun or nearly kill Ohnoki for him to then run away and go aid Shisui. Other than that though, Itachi can't really pull off if Itachi can't really pull that off, he's kind of just a dead man. Ohnoki is the only character in the entire summit to have a counter to the Amaterasu, being just his particle style, which would literally just vaporize it or whatever it touches. For example, if it hits Akatsuchi's clothes or whatever, Ohnoki could then just evaporate the clothes and hence Amaterasu as well. So there just isn't really much else to cover for this match. Maybe Shisui could kill Danzo so fast that he could come back and fight Ohnoki and maybe catch him off guard, but again, he's not fast enough either and would also have to Genjutsu him, which may actually be plausible if you subscribe to Shisui having 2 separate Kodo Amatsu Kami, one strong one and one weaker one, which is possible as I discussed in my previous Shisui videos, but that's about it. So leading into that, how does Shisui actually fight Danzo, and could he clear to say that Itachi and Shisui just clear the summit easily? And I mean, bro, Shisui's main-lighted scaling was literally just him being above the Sasuke that fought Danzo, and while many people love to just point out Danzo's feats and ignore Sasuke's, it's made very clear that Sasuke is the superior in combat, and almost every single time that Danzo catches him, it's because of another factor in play, such as how when Danzo first dodges the Susanoo fist, he is merely being revived and jumping through the bridge, and the Susanoo hand is rotated horizontally on the pillar, then has to rotate it back, and then just slam down on that spot, whereas Danzo just has to keep moving, which is pretty consistent with how Sasuke just kills him instantly with Amaterasu, which seemed to drain Sasuke out of the Susanoo, making it the perfect moment for Danzo to get behind him and use his vacuum style, which he just tanks and then reacts to with his summoning hawk, which Danzo then responds by his vacuum style once again, but this time Sasuke is on guard and has no trouble diving straight over it and off the hawk and weaving the attack to then match Danzo here. And while you may note Danzo actually touches Sasuke's throat first, that's rather irrelevant, as Sasuke is already cutting through the entire body and then the arm after, which Danzo simply just couldn't react to and died. Now Danzo then respawns and Sasuke just puts him in a genjutsu. But then it gets worse for Danzo from there, as it becomes pretty apparent of just how superior Sasuke is, as he is completely paralyzed, and Danzo goes to cut his neck, and even Obito begins to Kamui teleport to save Sasuke, but Sasuke Susanoo was so much faster than even that part of Kamui suck, and more importantly, Danzo's combat speed, to where even when the blade was an inch away from Sasuke's neck, and mid-swing, the entire skeletal Susanoo can actually just arise and cut Danzo's arm. So yeah, then he gets amped and then just blitzes him twice with the Susanoo arrow. So you could point out the theme of how Danzo only does really good in certain areas where Sasuke is at a very disadvantageous position and Danzo is at a very advantageous one. When it's fair game, or even just not a terrible disadvantage, Sasuke is the clear superior, meaning that, again, taking our line for Shisui's scaling, he would hence be far superior as well and could just blitz around and slice up Danzo to ribbons until the timers for the Izanagi does just run out. And then if you are one to subscribe to Shisui having the Susanoo due to the Naruto Top 99 artwork, or you just think the cutscene is canon by the game's admission, then by all means the Susanoo would just be another extremely deadly move and would just be another asset for Shisui to not only put Danzo down, but also to shield himself from any of those off-guard attacks. And then of course Itachi could also just come to help Shisui out if you do think he makes it out of the room against Ohnoki, making it to the conclusion of this video that if a younger Itachi and Shisui, like from the days they were in like the Anbu and like the higher areas, I mean Shisui wasn't, but like whenever they were at that realm of Endeavor, like in their Konoha days, if they were placed in the Taku's position as like a mission at the Five Kage Summit, they actually probably could clear it much faster and easier, with the only time they'd actually be defeated would be Itachi against Ohnoki, where the mission would still be accomplished even if he were to die, as Danzo is dead. However, if Itachi could just Tsukiyomi him prior to the particle style being completely formed, then by all means that's a very valid way, which could happen like 4 out of 10 times, but like it's kind of like a if he could pull it off type of thing, where the other thing is kind of just, I mean, it's not even bad for Itachi. Like, Ohnoki really is just a monster among monsters, and people just don't realize that. And, yeah, that's the video. If you guys did enjoy the video and want to see more like this, then please consider subscribing, as it does help out a lot. And, comment what your thoughts are in the comments below. Do you think Itachi slaughters Ohnoki, or do you think that they don't even touch the Raikage? Even way, you know, either way, I am just pretty curious on what you guys have to say and your guys' thoughts. So, by all means, yeah, as always, love you guys.